I never imagined my life would turn out this way. 3 years ago, I was living in a comfortable apartment in downtown Chicago, working as a paralegal at a respected law firm, with dreams of going to law school someday. Now, I was living in a converted garage behind my in-laws' house in suburban Connecticut, with my husband Mark and our 1-year-old daughter Emma. The arrangement had started as a temporary solution. Mark's parents, Richard and Diane, had suggested we move into their converted garage apartment after Mark lost his job in tech during company-wide layoffs. We had been struggling to keep up with rent in the city, and with a baby on the way, the offer seemed like a blessing. The rent would be minimal, just $400 a month to cover utilities, and we could save for a down payment on our own home. Diane had been so enthusiastic about having her grandchild close by. Just for 6 months, Mark had promised, squeezing my hand as we drove up the long driveway of the 2-story colonial house where he'd grown up. We'll be back on our feet in no time. That was 18 months ago. I glanced at the clock on our microwave. 7:15 a.m. Mark had already left for his new job at an insurance company. The pay wasn't great, but it was steady. I had given up my paralegal position when we moved, and now worked remotely as a virtual assistant, fitting in hours during Emma's naps and in the evenings. I was exhausted all the time, but we were slowly building our savings. $27,456 so far, not enough for a down payment in this area, but getting closer. The sound of the back door of the main house opening made my stomach tighten. Through our kitchen window, I could see Diane crossing the yard, still in her silk pajamas and robe, a mug of coffee in one hand and a ring of keys in the other. My keys. The keys to our apartment that she had insisted on having in case of emergency. I quickly pulled my bathrobe tighter and ran a hand through my unwashed hair. Emma was still asleep, and I'd been hoping to get a shower before she woke up. That clearly wasn't happening now. The lock turned before Diane even knocked. She never knocked. "Good morning, sweetheart," she called out in that sing-song voice that had once seemed motherly, but now set my teeth on edge. "I brought you some of those blueberry muffins I made. Richard said they're divine." "Thank you, Diane," I said, forcing a smile as she placed a plate on our tiny kitchen counter. "But you really didn't need to bring them over so early. I could have come by later to get them." "Oh, it's no trouble. I was up anyway." She glanced around our small living space, her eyes lingering disapprovingly on the basket of unfolded laundry and the baby toys scattered across the floor. "My goodness, it's a bit chaotic in here, isn't it? I could help you tidy up while Emma's still sleeping." "No, that's okay," I said quickly. "I have a system. It may look messy, but I know where everything is." Diane smiled that tight smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Of course you do, dear. I just worry that it's not the healthiest environment for little Emma. Babies need order and cleanliness." I bit the inside of my cheek. Emma was perfectly healthy, happy, and hitting all her developmental milestones early. The paediatrician had just praised her progress at her last checkup, but somehow Diane always made me feel like I was failing as a mother. "I was actually about to hop in the shower before Emma wakes up," I said, trying to give her a hint. "Oh, well, don't let me stop you. I can just wait here in case she wakes up. You know how she loves her grandma." Before I could protest, Diane had settled herself on our couch and was flipping through a magazine she'd brought with her. I stood there for a moment, feeling like a stranger in my own home, before reluctantly heading to the bathroom. I turned on the shower but didn't get in. Instead, I sat on the closed toilet lid and put my head in my hands, trying to control my breathing. This was becoming a daily occurrence. Diane would let herself in, uninvited, sometimes multiple times a day. She would rearrange furniture, organise our closets, or just sit and watch Emma while making comments about my parenting choices. "Shouldn't she be wearing socks? Her feet look cold. I noticed you're still giving her that pacifier. The books say it's time to wean her off it." I put away those processed baby snacks and left some organic ones I picked up. They're much healthier. I had tried to establish boundaries, gently at first and then more firmly. Mark had even spoken to her a couple of times, but nothing changed. She always had an excuse. I was just trying to help. "I worry about you both. This is still part of our property, you know." That last one stung the most because it was true. We were living on their property, paying minimal rent, dependent on their generosity. How could I complain when they were doing us such a huge favour? The sound of Emma's cry cut through my thoughts. I turned off the shower and rushed out of the bathroom in my robe to find Diane already in Emma's room, lifting her from the crib. "There's my precious girl," she cooed, bouncing Emma on her hip. "Grandma's got you. Mommy was in the shower." "I wasn't—" I stopped myself. "I'll take her now, thank you." "Don't be silly. You go finish your shower. We're fine, aren't we, Emma Bear? We're going to have some special grandma time while Mommy gets herself together." I stood there, dripping water onto the floor, watching as Diane carried my daughter out of the room, talking to her in baby voice. I felt a hot tear slide down my cheek, followed by another, and then I was silently sobbing in the hallway of the garage apartment, feeling utterly powerless in my own life. That evening, when Mark came home, I was still seething. Emma was finally asleep after a day of being passed between Diane and me like a doll. I had barely managed to get any work done and had missed an important deadline for one of my clients. "Your mother came over again this morning," I said as he hung up his coat. She let herself in without knocking, again. Mark sighed, running a hand through his dark hair. "I'm sorry, Allie. I'll talk to her. You've said that before, 3 times now." I know. He sat heavily on the couch. "It's just, they're doing us such a big favour letting us stay here so cheaply. And Mum really does mean well. She just loves Emma so much. This isn't about her loving Emma. This is about respect and privacy. She treats this place like it's an extension of her house, not our home." "It kind of is an extension of their house, technically," Mark said quietly. I stared at him, feeling betrayed. "So you think it's okay for her to just walk in whenever she wants, to criticise everything I do, to take over with Emma like I'm some incompetent teenager instead of her mother? That's not what I meant." He reached for my hand, but I pulled away. "Of course it's not okay. I just think we need to be careful about how we handle this. We're still saving up, and we can't afford market rent around here yet. We could if we moved somewhere cheaper. My sister said we could stay with her in Michigan until we find a place." Mark's expression hardened. "We've talked about this. I'm not moving to Michigan. My job is here. My family is here. Your family is the problem. Lower your voice. You'll wake Emma," he hissed. I turned away, tears of frustration burning my eyes. We'd had variations of this conversation countless times over the past year, and it always ended the same way. Mark would promise to talk to his parents, nothing would change, and we'd repeat the cycle a few weeks later. "I can't keep living like this," I whispered. Mark came up behind me and put his hands on my shoulders. "It won't be forever. We're making progress. Look how much we've saved already." "At what cost? My sanity, my self-respect. I feel like I'm disappearing, Mark, like I'm just a guest in my own life." He turned me around to face him. 6 more months. That's all I'm asking. By then we'll have enough saved for a decent down payment, and I might get that promotion I've been working toward. Then we can get our own place, a real house not too far from here." "Not too far from your parents, you mean? They're not bad people, Allie. They've helped us when we needed it most." I knew he was right, at least partially. Richard and Diane had opened their home to us when we were desperate. They adored Emma and would do anything for her. But the constant invasion of privacy, the subtle and not so subtle criticisms, the way Diane especially seemed to undermine my authority as Emma's mother, it was wearing me down day by day. "Just talk to her again," I said finally. "Make her understand that she can't keep coming in without permission. We need some boundaries, even if we are living on their property." "I will," Mark promised, kissing the top of my head. "Tomorrow. I'll make it clear this time." I nodded, wanting to believe him but knowing deep down that nothing would change. Diane was used to being in control, and as long as we were living in her backyard, she would continue to treat our space as an extension of her domain. The next morning, I woke up with a renewed determination. If Mark couldn't set boundaries with his mother, then I would have to do it myself. I dressed in one of my old work outfits, a pencil skirt and blouse that made me feel more like my former professional self, and prepared what I wanted to say. But before I could head to the main house, there was a knock at our door. Not Diane's usual perfunctory tap before letting herself in, but a proper knock. When I opened it, I was surprised to find Richard standing there, looking uncomfortable. "Morning, Ali," he said, shifting from one foot to the other. "Got a minute?" "Of course," I replied, stepping back to let him in. Richard rarely came to the apartment, preferring to let Diane handle most of the interactions with us. He declined my offer of coffee and sat at our small kitchen table, his large frame making the space seem even smaller than it was. Richard was a successful real estate developer, and there was always something imposing about him, even when he was trying to be casual. "Diane tells me you've been a bit sensitive lately about her visits," he began. I felt my cheeks flush with anger. "Sensitive? Is that what she called it?" Richard held up a placating hand. "Her words, not mine. Look, I know my wife can be a bit overwhelming sometimes. She means well, but she's always been very hands-on, especially with Mark being our only child. I understand that, and I appreciate everything you both have done for us. But there needs to be some boundaries. We're adults. And this is supposed to be our home, even if it is on your property." "Absolutely," Richard nodded. "And that's actually what I wanted to talk to you about. The property." Something in his tone made me wary. "What about it?" "Well, Diane and I have been thinking. You and Mark have been saving up for a place of your own, which is commendable, but real estate around here, as you know, is outrageously expensive. We're aware. That's why we're saving so diligently." Right. But even with what you've saved, you're looking at a pretty hefty mortgage for anything decent in this area." He leaned forward. "So we had an idea. What if you didn't have to buy a house at all?" I stared at him blankly. "I don't understand. This property is almost an acre, plenty of room. What if, instead of that temporary apartment you're in now, we built you a proper guest house? A real home, right here on the property. 2 bedrooms, maybe even 3 for when you have another baby. A proper kitchen, your own laundry facilities, everything you'd want in a starter home." I felt like the air had been sucked out of the room. "You want us to live in your backyard permanently?" Richard chuckled. "When you put it that way, it sounds awful. But think about it. No mortgage, just a small contribution to the property taxes and utilities. You'd save a fortune. Emma would grow up right next to her grandparents, and best of all, we've already got architects drawing up plans." "You've been planning this, without even talking to us?" "We wanted it to be a surprise, a gift, really. Mark's birthday is coming up next month, and we thought it would be the perfect present." My mind was reeling. The thought of living permanently in Diane's orbit, having her drop in whenever she felt like it, never truly having our own space, it was my worst nightmare. "Have you discussed this with Mark?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. "Not the details, no, but he knows we've been thinking about ways to help you both get more settled. He seemed open to the idea when I floated it generally. Of course he was. Mark had always been close to his parents, especially his mother. The thought of living next door to them forever probably seemed ideal to him. Richard, I appreciate the thought, I really do, but I'm not sure that's what we want. Mark and I have been saving for our own place, something that's truly ours." His expression hardened slightly. "This would be truly yours. We'd sign over the portion of the property to you both. But it would still be connected to your property. We'd still be living in your backyard. I think you're being a bit ungrateful here." "Ali," Richard said, his tone cooling. "Do you know what a piece of property like this costs around here? We're offering you a gift worth hundreds of thousands of dollars." "I'm not ungrateful," I insisted. "I just think this is a major decision that Mark and I need to discuss privately." Of course." Richard stood up, straightening his golf shirt. "Talk it over with Mark, but remember, opportunities like this don't come along every day, and with another baby eventually. We're not planning another baby anytime soon," I said automatically, though in truth Mark had been bringing it up more frequently lately. Richard smiled knowingly. "Well, things happen when they happen. Just think about it, and maybe don't mention to Diane that I told you. She was so excited about surprising Mark." After he left, I sank into a chair, my mind spinning. A permanent house in my in-laws' backyard. a gift that would tie us to them forever. The thought made me feel physically ill. I needed to talk to Mark immediately. I picked up my phone to call him at work, but hesitated. This wasn't a conversation to have over the phone, and I wasn't sure I could keep my emotions in check. Better to wait until he got home. But as I sat there, something Richard had said kept nagging at me. We'd sign over the portion of the property to you both. Something about the way he'd phrased it didn't sit right. On impulse, I grabbed my laptop and searched for the county property records. It took some digging, but eventually I found what I was looking for, the deed to Richard and Diane's property. I scanned the legal description, but there was nothing unusual there. It was just as Richard had described, nearly an acre of prime real estate in one of Connecticut's most desirable suburbs. But then I noticed something else. The property wasn't solely in Richard and Diane's names. There was a third owner, Mark Winters, my husband. My heart began to pound. Mark owned part of his parents' property. How was that possible? And why had he never mentioned it to me? I dug deeper, finding the history of the property. It had originally belonged solely to Richard and Diane, purchased 30 years ago when they were newlyweds. But 5 years ago, they had transferred a 25% ownership stake to Mark. 5 years ago, just before Mark and I had met. With shaking hands, I pulled out the file where we kept all our important documents, birth certificates, social security cards, our marriage license. Behind these, I found a folder I'd never paid much attention to. Labelled MW Assets. Inside was a document I'd never seen before, a trust agreement establishing the Winters Family Trust, with Richard, Diane and Mark as trustees and beneficiaries. The legal language was dense, but I understood enough to grasp the basics. The Winters family home and property had been placed in a trust. Richard and Diane retained 75% ownership and full rights to live there for their lifetimes. Mark owned 25% and would inherit the remainder when his parents passed away. There were also provisions about future construction on the property and how it would be managed. My hands were shaking as I read further. One clause in particular jumped out at me. Any structures built on the property after the establishment of this trust shall be considered improvements to the trust property and shall be owned by the trust, not by individual trustees or their spouses. The implication hit me like a physical blow. If we accepted Richard and Diane's offer to build us a proper guest house, it wouldn't really be ours at all. It would belong to the trust, a trust that I had no part in. I felt sick. Had Mark known about this all along? Had our move to his parents' converted garage been part of some long-term plan? Was that why he was so resistant to moving elsewhere, even temporarily? I heard the sound of a key in the lock and quickly shoved the documents back into the folder. Diane walked in, carrying a basket of fresh laundry. "I washed those baby clothes that were soaking in your sink," she announced cheerfully. "Those stains were never going to come out the way you were doing it. You have to use hot water for fruit stains, dear." I stood up abruptly, nearly knocking over my chair. "Diane, I need you to leave." She blinked at me in surprise. "Excuse me?" "Please leave. Now, and give me back my keys." "Ali, what on earth has gotten into you? I'm just trying to help with the laundry." "I don't want your help. I want privacy in my own home. Give me the keys and leave." Diane set down the laundry basket, her expression hardening. "This is technically still our property, you know." "Yes, I'm becoming very aware of that fact," I replied coldly. "The keys, please." After a tense moment, Diane dug into her pocket and pulled out the key ring. She placed it on the counter with deliberate slowness. "I'm going to call Mark." "You're clearly not yourself today." "Go ahead. In fact, tell him to come home early. We have a lot to discuss." After Diane left, I collapsed onto the couch, my mind racing. Had I been played for a fool this entire time? Was this why Mark had been so eager for us to move in with his parents when he lost his job, rather than considering other options? Was our temporary living situation never meant to be temporary at all? I spent the rest of the day in a fog, going through the motions of caring for Emma and trying to catch up on work, all while questions churned in my mind. By the time I heard Mark's car in the driveway, I had worked myself into a state of cold fury. He walked in looking concerned. "Mum called me. She said you were acting strange and kicked her out. What's going on? I didn't answer immediately. Instead, I walked to the folder I'd found earlier and pulled out the trust document. I held it up. What's this, Mark? His face paled slightly. Where did you get that? It was in our files. The files in our home that I have every right to look through. Were you ever going to tell me about this? About the fact that you partly own your parents' property? That any house built here would belong to a trust that I have no part in? Mark ran a hand through his hair. A nervous gesture I'd seen countless times. It's complicated, Ali. Then uncomplicate it for me. Because from where I'm standing, it looks like you and your parents have been planning all along for us to live here permanently. Like this whole saving for our own place thing has been a charade. That's not true, he protested. Yes, I own part of their property through the trust. It was set up for estate planning purposes, to avoid probate when they eventually pass away. But that doesn't mean I was planning for us to live here forever. Really? Then why did your father offer to build us a permanent house here this morning? A house that, according to this document, would belong to the trust, not to us. Mark's expression shifted from defensive to confused. Dad made an offer like that. Today. Don't act surprised. He said you were aware they were thinking about ways to help us get more settled. He said you seemed open to the idea. We discussed generally that they might help us with a down payment on a house, but he never mentioned building something on their property. Mark's confusion seemed genuine, but I wasn't ready to trust it. He also mentioned this was supposed to be a surprise for your birthday. Convenient timing for you to pretend you knew nothing about it. Ali, I swear to you, I didn't know about any plans to build us a house here. He moved toward me, but I stepped back. Look, yes, I own part of my parents' property through the trust. It was set up before we met, and honestly, I didn't think it was relevant to our current situation. The garage apartment was only ever supposed to be temporary. But now they want it to be permanent, and according to this document, any house built here would belong to the trust, not to us personally. Did you know that? Mark hesitated. Yes, I was aware of that clause. But that doesn't mean... It means we'd never truly own our own home. We'd be living in a house owned by a trust controlled by your parents. Forever in their backyard. With your mother feeling entitled to walk in whenever she wants, because technically it's still her property. It wouldn't be like that, Mark insisted. We could establish boundaries. Dad would make Mum understand. I laughed bitterly. Like he's made her understand for the past 18 months. Your mother doesn't respect boundaries, Mark. She never has and she never will. And now I find out there's been this secret trust all along, that you've owned part of this property for years but never thought to mention it to your wife. It wasn't a secret. It just never came up. It wasn't relevant to our lives in Chicago. But it became very relevant when we moved here. Didn't it? And yet you still said nothing. Mark's expression hardened. What exactly are you accusing me of, Ali? Of conspiring with my parents to trap you in some kind of permanent living arrangement against your will? Do you really think I'd do that to you? I wanted to say no, of course not. But the evidence was piling up. His reluctance to move away even temporarily, his ineffective talks with his mother about boundaries, his father's surprise offer of a permanent house that would belong to the trust, not to us. It all painted a picture I couldn't ignore. I think you've been less than honest with me, I said finally. And I think we need to take a step back and reevaluate our situation. What does that mean? It means I'm calling my sister tonight. Emma and I are going to stay with her in Michigan for a while. I need some space to think. Mark's face drained of colour. You're leaving me, taking our daughter away. Ali, that's an extreme overreaction to what's essentially just a miscommunication. Is it? Because from where I'm standing, it looks like a deliberate omission of crucial information that affects our future as a family. You're blowing this way out of proportion. So I own part of my parents' property through a trust. So what? It doesn't change anything about our plans to eventually buy our own place. Except your parents are now planning to build us a house here, and you seem suspiciously unsurprised by the idea, despite claiming you knew nothing about it. Mark threw up his hands in frustration, because it's not a crazy idea. It makes financial sense. We'd save a fortune in mortgage payments. Emma would grow up close to her grandparents. What's so terrible about that? What's terrible is the feeling that decisions are being made about my life without my input or consent. What's terrible is discovering that my husband has kept important financial information from me for our entire relationship. What's terrible is the thought of living permanently under your mother's thumb in a house that isn't even really ours. Ali, please. Let's talk about this rationally. Don't make any hasty decisions. There's nothing hasty about it. I've been feeling suffocated here for months. So that's it? You're just going to take our daughter and leave, without even trying to work through this? I need space to think clearly, and I can't do that here. Not with your mother barging in constantly, and now this revelation about the property. I'll call you when we get to Michigan. I won't let you take Emma out of state. That's parental kidnapping. I stared at him, shocked by the threat. I'm her mother, Mark. I'm not kidnapping her. I'm taking her to stay with family while I sort out my feelings about our marriage. Unless you're planning to file for divorce and custody immediately, it's perfectly legal. The mention of divorce seemed to deflate him. I don't want a divorce, Ali. I love you. I love our family. Please, just don't leave. We can figure this out together. For a moment, I wavered. Despite everything, I did love Mark. We had built a life together, had a beautiful daughter. Was I overreacting? Was this truly worth potentially ending our marriage over? But then I thought about Diane walking into our home without knocking, criticising my parenting, taking over with Emma. I thought about the trust document and the fact that Mark had hidden it from me. I thought about the prospect of living permanently in my in-laws' backyard, in a house that would never truly be ours. I need some time, Mark. That's all I can say right now. He looked at me for a long moment, then nodded slowly. How long will you be gone? I don't know. A week, maybe 2. Long enough to clear my head and decide what I want to do next. And what about what I want? What about what's best for Emma? What's best for Emma is having a mother who isn't constantly undermined and disrespected. What's best for Emma is growing up in a home where her parents have an equal say in their family's future. Mark was silent for a moment. When will you leave? Tomorrow morning. I'll pack tonight. He nodded again, his expression unreadable. I'll sleep on the couch. That night, I lay awake in our bed, listening to Mark's restless movements in the living room. Was I making a mistake? Was I throwing away our marriage over what might be, as Mark had suggested, just a miscommunication? Or was I finally standing up for myself after months of feeling diminished and disrespected? I didn't know the answers. All I knew was that I needed space to think, away from the suffocating presence of Diane and the property that, I now realised, had never been and would never be truly ours. In the morning, Mark was subdued as he helped me load our suitcases into my car. Emma, blissfully unaware of the tension between her parents, babbled happily in her car seat, excited for what she thought was just a fun trip. Call me when you get there, Mark said as I prepared to leave. Let me know you both arrived safely. I will, I promised. And Ali. He hesitated. I do love you. Whatever you might think right now, I never intended to deceive you or trap you in a situation that makes you unhappy. I wanted to believe him. Part of me did believe him. But I also couldn't ignore the facts, the hidden trust, his parents' plans for a permanent house on their property, his reluctance to move away even temporarily. I love you too, I said finally. That's why I need to do this, to figure out what's best for all of us. As I drove away, watching Mark's figure grow smaller in my rearview mirror, I felt a complex mix of emotions: sadness, fear, uncertainty, but also a strange sense of liberation. For the first time in 18 months, I was making a decision for myself and my daughter, without the influence of Diane or the constraints of living on the Winters family property. I didn't know what the future held. I didn't know if Mark and I would find a way forward together, or if this was the beginning of the end for our marriage. All I knew was that I needed to reclaim my agency, my independence, and my sense of self-worth. And this was the first step. The drive to Michigan was long, giving me plenty of time to think as Emma napped in her car seat. I replayed the events of the past few days in my mind, trying to make sense of everything I'd learned. Part of me still couldn't believe that Mark had kept the trust a secret from me for our entire relationship. We'd always been open about our finances, or so I'd thought. When we were dating, we'd discussed our student loans, credit card debt, savings goals. After we got married, we'd merged our finances completely, sharing bank accounts and credit cards. I'd thought I knew everything about our financial situation, but apparently I hadn't known about Mark's 25% ownership stake in a piece of property worth well over $1 million. As I drove through Ohio, my phone rang. Mark's name flashed on the screen. I connected it to the car's Bluetooth. "Hey," I said, keeping my voice neutral. "Hey." He sounded tired. "Where are you?" "Just crossed into Ohio. Emma's napping." "Good, that's good." There was an awkward pause. "Listen. Hallie, I've been thinking about everything, and I want you to know that I never intended to hide anything from you. The trust was set up before we met, and honestly, I just didn't think about it much. It wasn't some grand deception. Intent aside, you still didn't tell me about it. Not when we got married. Not when we merged our finances. Not when we moved onto the property. Don't you think those were all opportunities where it might have been relevant to mention?" He sighed. "In retrospect, yes. I should have told you. But it honestly didn't seem important. It's not like I was receiving income from it or anything. It's just a piece of paper saying I'll inherit my parents' house someday, which isn't exactly surprising information. It's more than that, Mark. It's about the power dynamic. Your parents, especially your mother, already act like they have authority over our lives because we're living on their property. Finding out that you're actually part owner makes it even worse. It makes me wonder if you've been silently siding with them all along. That's not fair. I've always been on your side." "Have you?" "Because every time your mother oversteps, you talk to her, nothing changes, and you seem okay with that. You've never suggested moving elsewhere, even temporarily. You've never really stood up to her in any meaningful way. Because we need to save money, because they're helping us out. What do you want me to do? Start a war with my parents when we're living in their backyard and trying to save for our own place? What I wanted was for you to respect my feelings and set firm boundaries with your mother. What I wanted was full honesty about our financial situation, including your ownership stake in their property. What I wanted was to be an equal partner in decisions about our future, not to discover that plans were being made behind my back for us to live permanently in your parents' backyard." Mark was silent for a moment. "Mum and Dad came over last night after you went to bed," he said finally. "They were upset about you kicking Mum out. I confronted them about the house offer, and Dad admitted he'd spoken to you about it. He said he thought it would be a nice surprise for my birthday. And I told them it was inappropriate to make plans like that without discussing it with both of us first. I made it clear that we're still planning to buy our own place, not build on their property." "How did they take that?" "Dad seemed to understand. Mum was less receptive. She kept talking about how it would be so perfect for Emma to grow up next door to her grandparents, how we'd save so much money, how she could help with childcare." "Of course she did," I muttered. I stood my ground, Allie. I told them we appreciate everything they've done for us, but we need our own space, our own home, separate from theirs. I wanted to believe him, but after everything that had happened, I was sceptical. "And what about the trust? Did you discuss that?" "Yes. I explained that I should have told you about it a long time ago, and that finding out about it the way you did made you feel betrayed. Dad agreed that we should have been more transparent." "And your mother?" Mark hesitated. "She didn't quite see the issue. She said family property is family property, and that you were overreacting." I laughed bitterly. "Of course she did. But I stood up for you, Allie. I told her that wasn't fair, that you had every right to be upset about being kept in the dark about something so significant. And how did that go over? About as well as you'd expect. She got defensive, said I was taking your side against my family. Dad eventually had to step in and calm things down. I absorbed this information silently. It was the first time Mark had truly stood up to his mother on my behalf, at least from the sound of it. But was it too little? Too late? "Where do we go from here, Mark?" He sighed heavily. "I don't know. I want you and Emma to come home. I want us to work this out. But I understand why you needed space, and I respect that. I need time to think, to decide if I can trust you again, if we can move forward from this. I understand. Just don't make any permanent decisions without talking to me first, okay? We're still a family, whatever else is going on. I won't, I promised. I'll call you when we get to Katie's place. After we hung up, I mulled over our conversation. Mark seemed genuinely remorseful, and he'd finally confronted his parents about their behaviour. But was it enough? Could we rebuild the trust that had been broken? My sister Katie was waiting on her front porch when I pulled into her driveway in Grand Rapids. She rushed down the steps to help with Emma and the bags, wrapping me in a tight hug when I stepped out of the car. "You look exhausted," she said, studying my face. "Come inside. I've got dinner waiting, and the guest room is all set up for you two." Katie's house was modest but comfortable, a far cry from the grandeur of the winter's colonial. As we settled in that evening, Emma playing with the toys Katie had bought for her, I filled my sister in on everything that had happened. "Wow," she said when I'd finished. "That's a lot to process. What are you thinking of doing?" "I honestly don't know. Part of me is still so angry and hurt. I feel like our entire marriage has been built on a lie, or at least a significant omission. But another part of me wonders if I'm overreacting. Mark says he didn't think the trust was important enough to mention, and maybe that's true. But it became important when you moved onto the property, right? That would have been the time to disclose it." "Exactly. And then to find out his parents are planning to build us a permanent house there. Without even consulting me first, it feels like my agency is being stripped away bit by bit." Katie nodded thoughtfully. "I can see why you're upset. But I also think people make mistakes, and relationships survive them all the time. The question is whether you think Mark's mistake was an innocent oversight, or part of a pattern of deception. That's what I'm trying to figure out. And I can't do that while living in Diane's backyard, with her walking in whenever she feels like it, criticising everything I do. Well, you can stay here as long as you need to. Take the time to clear your head and decide what you want." Over the next few days, I settled into a routine at Katie's house. I worked remotely during Emma's naps, and in the evenings, took long walks with my daughter in Katie's peaceful neighbourhood, and spent hours talking with my sister about my marriage and my options. Mark called every day to check in and talk to Emma. Our conversations were cordial but strained. He kept assuring me that he was working on setting firmer boundaries with his parents, especially his mother, but I remained sceptical. A week into our stay, my phone rang with a number I didn't recognise. When I answered, I was surprised to hear Richard's voice. "Ali, it's Richard, Mark's dad. I hope it's okay that I called. Mark gave me your number." "It's fine," I said cautiously. "What can I do for you, Richard?" I wanted to apologise for my part in all this. I should have been more transparent about the trust and about our thoughts for the property. It was wrong of me to discuss building you a house with Mark without including you in those conversations. His apology seemed sincere, which surprised me. "Thank you. I appreciate that. I also want you to know that I've had a long talk with Diane. She understands now that her behaviour has been overbearing. She's agreed to respect your boundaries going forward." I couldn't help but laugh sceptically. "No offence, Richard, but I've heard that before. Nothing ever changes. I know you have no reason to believe me, but this time is different. Diane can see how her actions have affected your marriage, and that's the last thing she wants. She loves Mark, and she loves Emma, and believe it or not, she cares about you too. She has a funny way of showing it." Richard sighed. "Diane is decomplicated. She's always been overprotective of Mark, and when Emma came along, that instinct just extended to her granddaughter. In her mind, she was helping, not interfering. But I've made it clear to her that regardless of her intentions, her behaviour has been unacceptable. And she just accepted that? It wasn't easy. We've had some heated discussions over the past week, but she's coming around. She understands now that if she wants to be part of your lives, she needs to respect your boundaries." I wasn't convinced, but I appreciated Richard's effort. "Thank you for calling, Richard, and for the apology. There's one more thing," he added. "I've spoken with our lawyer about modifying the trust. We'd like to add you as a beneficiary, with an equal share to Mark's. That way, if anything were to happen to him, you and Emma would be protected. I was taken aback by the offer. That's very generous, but I'm not sure it addresses the fundamental issue here. Which is? That I don't want to live in your backyard forever. Whether I'm part of the trust or not. Mark and I need our own space, our own home, separate from you and Diane. I understand that completely. And to be clear, we're not pushing for you to build on our property anymore. That offer is off the table unless you decide someday that it's what you want. We just want to make sure that you're properly included in the family's financial arrangements as Mark's wife and Emma's mother. After the call ended, I sat in Katie's kitchen, turning over Richard's words in my mind. His apology had seemed genuine, and the offer to add me to the trust was unexpected but welcome. Still, I remained wary. Words were one thing, actions were another. I'd need to see real change before I could fully trust either of my in-laws again. Later that evening, I called Mark to tell him about Richard's call. "Dad told me he was going to reach out to you," Mark said. "I hope that was okay. He really feels terrible about everything." It was fine. He apologised, which I appreciate. He also said he's talked to your mother about respecting our boundaries. Mark chuckled. That's an understatement. He's been reading her the Riot Act all week. I've never seen him come down so hard on her before. Really? That surprised me. Richard had always seemed to indulge Diane's controlling tendencies. Really, he made it clear that her behaviour was threatening to drive away her only son and granddaughter. That seemed to finally get through to her. He also mentioned adding me to the trust. Yeah, that was actually my suggestion. I realised how bad it looked that you weren't included, like you weren't really considered part of the family in a financial sense. I wanted to fix that. I felt a surge of warmth toward Mark. Despite everything, he was trying to make amends. That means a lot to me. So, Mark hesitated, does this change anything? About you and Emma coming home? I sighed. I'm still not sure, Mark. Your dad's apology and the trust modification are steps in the right direction, but I need to see real change from your mother before I can consider moving back to the apartment. What if we weren't moving back to the apartment? What do you mean? I've been looking at rentals in the area. There's a small house about 15 minutes from my parents' place that's within our budget. It's nothing fancy, but it's got 2 bedrooms, a decent yard for Emma to play in, and most importantly, it's our own space. No in-laws in the backyard. I was stunned. You're serious? You're willing to move out of your parents' place? I am. I've been doing a lot of thinking this past week, Ali, about what's most important to me. And that's you and Emma, our family. If living in my parents' backyard is making you unhappy, then we need to make a change. But what about saving for a down payment? Wasn't that the whole point of living with your parents? We'll still save, just not as aggressively. Maybe it'll take us an extra year or 2 to buy a place of our own, but that's a small price to pay for your happiness and the health of our marriage. I felt tears welling in my eyes. This was all I'd wanted, for Mark to prioritise our nuclear family over his parents' wishes, to stand up for what we needed as a couple and as parents to Emma. I'd like to see this rental, I said finally. Maybe you could send me the listing. I'll do better than that. I've already scheduled a viewing for next Saturday. If you're willing to come back for the weekend, we could look at it together. No pressure to move back permanently yet. You could stay with Katie a bit longer if you want, but at least we'd be taking a step toward a solution. For the first time in weeks, I felt a glimmer of hope. I'd like that, I said softly. The following Saturday, I drove back to Connecticut with Emma, feeling a mix of anticipation and apprehension. Mark met us at a coffee shop near his parents' house, his face lighting up when he saw Emma. "There's my girl," he said, scooping her up and twirling her around, making her giggle with delight. "Daddy missed you so much." He turned to me, his expression more tentative. "Hi, Ali." "Hi," I replied, suddenly shy. Despite everything, seeing him again after 2 weeks apart made my heart skip a beat. "The viewing is at 2 ice," he said as we settled at a table. "We have about an hour before we need to head over." I thought maybe we could talk a bit first. I nodded, bouncing Emma on my knee. That sounds good. Mark took a deep breath. I want to start by saying again how sorry I am, for not telling you about the trust, for not standing up to my mother sooner, for letting things get to the point where you felt you had to leave. I've done a lot of thinking these past 2 weeks, and I realise now how selfish I've been. I wouldn't call it selfish exactly, I said carefully, but I do think you've been torn between your loyalty to your parents and your commitment to our marriage, and too often your parents have won that tug of war. He nodded soberly. You're right. It's been hard for me to break away from the patterns I grew up with. My mum has always been involved in my life, to put it mildly, and until I met you, I never really questioned that. It was just normal to me. I understand that. I do. But Mark, we're a family now. You, me, and Emma. We need to be each other's priority. I know, and I want you to know that I'm committed to making that happen. No more letting my mother walk all over our boundaries, no more keeping things from you, even if I don't think they're important. Complete transparency from now on. I reached across the table and took his hand. That's all I've ever wanted. He squeezed my hand. There's something else I want to show you before we go to the viewing. He pulled out his phone and showed me a photo of a set of keys. These are the only keys to our apartment now. I had the locks changed yesterday. Mum no longer has access unless we explicitly invite her in. I felt tears welling in my eyes. You changed the locks? I did. Dad helped me convince Mum it was necessary. She wasn't happy about it, but she's accepted it. It's a small step, but I wanted you to know I'm serious about respecting your boundaries. That simple act, changing the locks on our apartment, meant more to me than any words could. It was a tangible sign that Mark was finally ready to establish boundaries with his mother, to prioritise our privacy and autonomy as a family. Thank you, I whispered. That means a lot. The rental house was modest but charming, a small Cape Cod with a fenced backyard, located in a quiet neighbourhood with good schools. It needed some cosmetic updates. The kitchen cabinets were dated, and the carpets would definitely need to be replaced, but it was clean, structurally sound, and most importantly, it was our own space. What do you think? Mark asked as we stood in the small living room, Emma toddling around exploring her potential new home. I love it, I said honestly. It's perfect for us right now. Not too big, not too small, and no in-laws in the backyard. He laughed. That's the main selling point, isn't it? Pretty much, I admitted with a smile. So, should we apply? I hesitated. Are you sure about this, Mark? It's going to mean a significant change in our savings plan, and it's further from your parents than you're used to. I'm sure. Our marriage is more important than saving a few extra dollars each month. And 15 minutes isn't that far. Mom and Dad can still see Emma regularly, just on our terms. I took a deep breath. Then yes, let's apply. The property manager took our application on the spot, and to our surprise, approved us immediately thanks to our excellent credit scores and rental history. We could move in at the beginning of the next month, just 2 weeks away. As we drove back to his parents' house to pick up my car, Mark brought up the next challenge. Mum wants to see Emma before you head back to Michigan. She's promised to be on her best behaviour. I felt a knot form in my stomach. Despite the positive changes of the past 2 weeks, I still wasn't sure I was ready to face Diane. I don't know, Mark. It would just be for an hour or so. Dad will be there too, and I'll be right by your side the whole time. She really has been trying to understand how her behaviour has affected you. I sighed. All right, but at the first sign of her overstepping, we're leaving. Agreed. Richard greeted us warmly when we arrived at the house. Diane was more subdued than I'd ever seen her, hanging back in the doorway with an uncertain expression. Hello, Allie, she said carefully. It's good to see you. And Emma? My goodness, she's grown in just 2 weeks. I managed a small smile. Babies do that. There was an awkward silence before Richard stepped in. Why don't we all go sit in the living room? Diane has set out some coffee and those cookies you like, Allie. The next hour was strained but civil. Diane was clearly making an effort to control her usual tendency to dominate conversations and give unsolicited advice. She asked polite questions about my sister and her house in Michigan, cooed appropriately over Emma's new words and skills, and didn't once mention my parenting choices. As we were preparing to leave, Diane asked if she could speak to me privately for a moment. Mark looked at me questioningly, and I nodded. It was time to clear the air. Diane led me to the sunroom at the back of the house, her usual domain where she tended to her extensive collection of houseplants. She gestured for me to sit on one of the wicker chairs. "I owe you an apology, Allie," she began, her voice uncharacteristically hesitant. "Richard and Mark have helped me see that my behaviour has been inappropriate. I've been disrespectful of your privacy and your authority as Emma's mother." I nodded but remained silent, waiting for her to continue. "It's hard for me to admit when I'm wrong," she went on. "I've always prided myself on knowing what's best for my family, but I've come to realise that my family has grown and changed. It's not just Richard and Mark anymore, it's you and Emma too. And I need to respect the boundaries of your immediate family unit." "Yes, you do," I agreed quietly. "I want you to know that I'm committed to doing better. No more letting myself into your home without permission. No more criticising your parenting choices. No more trying to take over with Emma." "I appreciate that, Diane. But I've heard promises before." She nodded, looking genuinely remorseful. "I know words aren't enough. That's why I've agreed to see a therapist." Richard insisted, and for once, I'm taking his advice without argument. I've already had 2 sessions, and while it's early days, I'm beginning to understand how my controlling tendencies have affected those around me. Especially you. I was shocked. The idea of Diane Winters, who had always presented herself as the perfect wife, mother, and grandmother, seeking therapy, was almost unbelievable. That's a big step. I'm impressed that you're willing to do that. "It hasn't been easy," she admitted, "but the thought of losing my relationship with Mark, with you, with Emma, it was a wake-up call. I don't want to be the mother-in-law from hell, Allie. I want to be someone you can count on, someone you trust with Emma, someone you're happy to have in your lives." For the first time, I felt a genuine connection with Diane. She was trying, really trying, to change for the sake of our family. "Thank you," I said sincerely. "That means a lot to me." "Mark told us about the rental house," she added. "It looks lovely. And while I'll miss having you all so close by, I understand why you need your own space. Just promise you'll still bring Emma to visit regularly." "Of course we will. She adores her grandparents." "I've never wanted to keep her from you. I just needed boundaries." Diane nodded. Boundaries. That's a word my therapist uses a lot. I'm still learning what it means in practice, but I'm committed to respecting yours from now on. When we returned to the main part of the house, Mark looked at me questioningly. I gave him a small nod and a smile. It wasn't a complete resolution. Trust would take time to rebuild, but it was a start. On the drive back to Michigan that evening, I called Mark from the road. "How do you think it went?" he asked. "Better than I expected," I admitted. "Your mum seems genuinely willing to change." The therapy was a surprise. Trust me, no one was more surprised than I was when she agreed to go. Dad must have been very persuasive. "Do you think it will stick? The new boundaries, I mean." Mark sighed. "I hope so. I think the reality of potentially losing contact with Emma was a real shock to her system. And Dad's been firm about supporting our need for space and autonomy. It won't be perfect overnight, but I believe she's sincere about wanting to do better." "I think so too," I said, surprising myself with the admission. "Enough that I'm willing to give it another try." I mean Emma and I will come home next weekend. We'll stay in the apartment until our rental is ready, and then we'll move to the new house, together." I could hear the relief and joy in Mark's voice. "Really? You're sure?" "I'm sure. We still have things to work through, trust to rebuild. But I believe we can do it. I want our family to be whole again. I want that too. More than anything." There was a pause. "I love you, Allie. I'm so sorry for everything." "I love you too. And I'm looking forward to starting this new chapter of our lives. In our own home, on our own terms. 2 weeks later, we moved into our rental house. It wasn't fancy or large, but it was ours. And there were no in-laws in the backyard. I'll never forget the feeling of turning the key in our own front door for the first time, Emma on my hip, Mark by my side, our future stretching out before us. Diane and Richard came to visit that first weekend, bringing a houseplant as a housewarming gift instead of the mountain of unwanted items I'd feared. Diane asked before picking up Emma, complimented our decorating choices without a hint of criticism, and didn't once open a cupboard or rearrange anything. Small steps, but meaningful ones. Over the following months, we settled into a new normal. Mark and I attended couples counselling to work through the trust issues that had developed. Diane continued with her therapy and made steady progress in respecting our boundaries. We visited Richard and Diane's house for Sunday dinners, but they only came to our house when explicitly invited. As for the trust and the property, Richard followed through on his promise to add me as a beneficiary with an equal share to Mark's. But more importantly, Mark and I made a decision together. We would save for our own home, on our own property, completely separate from his parents. It might take longer, but it would be truly ours. A year after our move to the rental house, we put a down payment on a small home about 20 minutes from Richard and Diane's place, close enough for regular visits, but far enough for real independence. Our savings hadn't grown as quickly as they might have if we'd stayed in the garage apartment, but the $42,000 we'd managed to set aside, combined with a first-time homebuyer program, was enough to make our dream a reality. The day we signed the papers, Mark squeezed my hand across the closing table. "Our own place," he whispered. "No strings attached." I smiled back at him, thinking of how far we'd come. From the suffocating confines of the garage apartment, with Diane walking in unannounced and boundaries being trampled, to this moment of true independence and mutual respect. Living in my husband's parents' backyard had taught me valuable lessons about the importance of boundaries, open communication, and standing up for myself. I couldn't take it when those boundaries were violated and my autonomy was threatened. But by finding the courage to walk away temporarily, I had ultimately saved my marriage and reshaped my relationship with my in-laws. As we turned the key in the door of our new home for the first time, Emma running ahead to explore her new kingdom, I felt a profound sense of peace. This was what I had fought for, not just a physical space of our own, but the right to define our family on our own terms, to be equal partners in deciding our future, and to be respected as the primary decision-makers for our daughter. It hadn't been an easy journey, but standing there in the doorway of our very own home, watching my husband and daughter exploring the rooms that were truly, legally, unquestionably ours, I knew it had been worth every difficult moment. If you like this story, please like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share your impressions of this story in the comments. To listen to the next story, click on the box on the left